Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TechFire this morning in association with Rubrik. My name is Niall Kitson. I'm editor of TechCentral.ie and your moderator for this morning's webinar. And thank you all for escaping from a really terrible Wednesday morning out there. We appreciate your eyeballs and your attention for the next hour. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website, techfire.ie. At registration, you had a chance to submit a question for the panel, but if a point comes up you would like us to address, you can do so through the Q&A function below. Contributions will be moderated by Julia, who's working away in the background, and we will get around to as many as time permits. As always, there is a prize for one lucky delegate. This morning, we have an Apple Watch SE. Our winner will be selected at random at the end of the session, with the usual caveat that you have to be online when your name is called out. Now, on with the show. The housekeeping is done. In 2020, many companies were forced to accelerate their digital transformation efforts to meet the demands of remote working. As more data and applications either moved to the cloud for the first time or even switched between vendors, complexity and poor security have come to the fore as significant barriers to progress. This brings us to this morning's burning question. Do you have the tools and the vision for a successful and secure migration to the cloud? To explore this, we are joined by James Hughes and Patrick Merrigan from Rubrik and Stephen Byrne from Stryker. Before I welcome our first guest, we will have two polls this morning. So let's bring up the first one now. So Dave, if you want to bring up our first poll. Question is, did your company revise its cloud migration plans over the past year? Yes or no? So we'll just take a second for everyone to pitch in. Okay, Dave, if you'd like to close off the poll there. So it looks like an almost even split, which is interesting. That's a point we'll revisit later on in the Q&A section. So now to our first guest of the morning. James Hughes is VP of Sales Engineering with Rubrik, where he previously held the position of Field CTO focusing on global enterprises. Prior to his time at Rubrik, James held a number of high-level roles with Schroders, Premium Credit, PIMCO, and Investment Bank. I believe at one stage he was actually a customer of Rubrik before he went to work there. So we joked before that he liked the company so much he bought it. If you remember your Remington ads from back in the day. James is also a chartered information technology professional with the British Computer Society and a board member of various governance and standards bodies. James, thanks for joining us. If you'd like to, yes.
Good morning.
How are you this morning?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem at all. So James, you have sort of the Rubrik story for us, if you will, if you'd like to tell us what makes Rubrik special and the sort of problems that you're solving at the moment.
Yeah, I'll pull up a visual if that's okay.
Of course.
So this is Rubrik. So thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, so I've spent the last 20 or so years mostly in financial services, either in asset management, in banking, in fintech, and most recently at a FTSE 100 company called Schroders. So I was very happy with what I was doing. I was very happy in that sector. I knew how it all worked. I was doing a lot more with fintech, which is the exciting end of financial services. And then I met the CEO and founder of Rubrik, being a guy called Bipul Sinha, who just made me see the world a little bit differently. And I had this amazing light bulb moment to the point where when I was asked to come and join, or would I like to come and join the company, I really didn't think twice about it. I think what we're doing here at Rubrik is pretty amazing. There's some pretty amazing stuff, and I get to work with some absolutely amazing people across every single sector. My experience has all been about banking and FS, but these days I'm with governments, I'm with state governments, I'm with still with the banking sector, with social media, gaming, offshore. finance, we do an awful lot in just about every single sector. And the problem we're trying to solve these days is to really help you on your cloud journeys, but also just help you look after what's most important. The most important asset in your organization is the data. And what we want to do is help you focus on solving the right problems and being able to mitigate the risk of losing that data. So this journey for me started with Rubrik 2.5 years ago, but the journey with Rubrik started in 2013, 2014, thereabouts. And what we've set out to build is a platform that can be a data management platform, not a backup platform. It's all about data management. But like any good platform, all platforms have applications, they have apps. And the first app we set out to build was all about data protection, was all about really disrupting the backup market. Because again, in 2014, 2013, when the vision was created, and I know this this webinar is all about vision, and we do a lot with vision. We're talking about what the future can look like continuously at Rubrik. And again, if you see the Gartner Magic Quadrant, we're top right for vision, just about how we see the world, how we see our customers, and how we see our customers working with data in this new world that we find ourselves in. And this platform was built from day one to just be, an absolute disruptor and to fit what our customers wanted. We could see that they were all modernizing their environments. This is when digital transformation started being a thing. Now, I hate that word these days, but you know what it means. It means moving from a more legacy environment to a more modern environment. And having been on the customer side and really driven this, it's a real privilege to see a lot of our customers doing something similar. So we knew they were modernizing. We knew that they wanted to automate. There's so many manual tasks in IT. And I think actually this pandemic as well, suddenly when everyone's working from home, I think this pandemic, a year ago, really revealed just how much manual stuff gets done in IT. And it's much harder to do remotely, which, IT teams seem to have got the hang of now, which is excellent. But we could see that automation was going to be on the rise. We could see then that cloud as well, the embryonic stage, we could see cloud was starting to start. But these days, it's rife, it's massive. Cloud is enormous. And Google, Amazon, Microsoft, as well as Office 365, we see, really, really exploding. But then the last thing and the major problem that, we set out to solve was all about data risk. So as your organizations continue to grow, the data, things that you need to be able to protect, being the data, has never been at more risk. And I'm very lucky that I get to work with all of our customers, but I also get to work with central government agencies and central government and academia as well. And we pull all this data together to see what's actually going on in the world. And the threats against your data at the moment, frankly, has never been more. The amount of ransomware that's kicking around at the moment, purely because, and it all started again, roughly a year ago, when people were really vulnerable working from home. COVID brought out the best of humanity, but also the worst. So people started getting text messages and emails all about, your Amazon delivery is going to be coming soon. When it wasn't Amazon, it was people that wanted you to click on something. So things really spread like wildfire. And there's some stats out there on the internet about how much it grew by, but it grew massively. And what I've really found amazing since I've started really researching this is just how many ransoms are being paid in the billions of dollars now. So while the ransoms are still continuing to be paid, that funds the bad guys to write more malicious code, which is a now self-fulfilling prophecy. There's no incentive for them to ever stop. They're just going to make it more and more sophisticated. So that's what Rubrik is, a major problem that Rubrik is trying to solve. So when it comes to automation, we don't believe in backup jobs anymore. We believe in you telling us what your most important assets are, how long you want to keep it for, and how long you need to archive it for. So for an example, if you had a SQL server that was core to your environment, you would say, right, let's take a snapshot of this every 5 minutes. Let's keep it in our data center for a week in case we need to be able to recover. And then our data regulations say that we've got to keep this data for the next 5 years. So you can configure that. And then that data in 5 years can either go to the cloud, it can go something cheap and deep. If it does go to the cloud, we can then age and tier it out. So it's always on the cheapest possible form of storage that you need. Rapid recovery is also really, really key. There's no point protecting your data if you can't get it back really, really quickly. So we really specialize in that. And we've got a function called live mount. So if the world is melting and you've got major problems, you can mount that application up onto Rubrik, and Rubrik will host the apps while you guys can figure things out. It's obviously API first, and we help you do that. But when it comes to secure, why Rubrik is pretty unique, and how we developed this thing is it's all about an immutable file platform, meaning if data is written to Rubrik, it can never ever be overwritten, which is really, really key these days, because as ransomware gets more sophisticated, it targets your backups first. And once it's got your backups, it'll go for your production data, and then you have to pay the ransom, and then it all continues again. So we've got that. But then, like with any application or with any platform, the apps become key. And we went to our customers and said, what problem do you want us to really look at? And they all came back with ransomware, which is why we kind of focus on this a lot these days. And the major problem with ransomware is kind of knowing the blast radius. Once it gets into your environment, how far has it got? How far has it spread? And while the world is melting and while you're panicking trying to get everything recovered, you start overwriting files that potentially haven't been compromised, or you start overwriting files that have had a day's worth of change in them, but you've done a mass restore to try and get your business working. What we can do is really show your environment about what has changed, what hasn't changed, and then help you prioritize your restore. So if any of you are working in batch, an environment with batch processing or sort of sequence time processing, you can restore the things that you need most appropriately, and then set the rest of it to kind of restore overnight, so you're ready to go for your next business day. So we're doing a lot around cyber resilience, and this means that we're not looking for strains of ransomware, because that's a never-ending task. What we're looking is for heuristic change rates, and we've got really, really smart really smart algorithms, which kind of show, what a normal day in your environment looks like. Because if you think about it, if we're looking at everything in your data centers, and we also can look at everything in your cloud, we're the only platform within your environment who would get to see all of your data all of the time. And that allows us to build a really good picture about what a normal day in your organization looks like. So if you do have something awful in it, we can then show you, actually, there's something here that's not quite right. This might be real, this might not be real, but if it is real, we can action it, and we can get you up and running really, really quickly. So there's a lot to be said there, and there's a lot of cool stuff we're doing there. And then lastly, before I sort of hand back, is data governance. It's all about risk with data governance. What data have you got? And in this new world where data is more sporadic, it's in the cloud, it's in Office 365, it's in your data centers, it's more important these days to know what data actually you have. And do you have any GDPR related data? Do you have American entities? California have just released their Privacy Act. There's another one, and now state by state, the US government, the US are starting to give Privacy Acts. Then Asia will be doing something similar. India will be doing something similar, as well as the UK creating its own data governance rules. But any global entity or any firms working in a global way will need to adhere to these things, and you'll be able to find that data. And it's really hard to do, and it's expensive. And also, when you're really searching for this stuff, it adds a whole load of overhead to your production performance. So what we do is we go after it in the backup, which is all a secondary copy of your data, which means if you're looking for sensitive data, credit card numbers, driving license IDs, national insurance, social security, anything like that, we'll tell you where it is. And then you can set your own rules against it. What we're also really going into is data sovereignty. And data sovereignty is a really big key, a really big challenge in the cloud world, because you've got some data that can never ever leave certain jurisdictions. But we know people are like water, right? They find a way around IT rules. I certainly know that from my experience on the customer side. And it's hard to find that data. But again, if you're looking at Swiss banking numbers, for example, and you see that being backed up on a device in, say, Singapore, then you've got a problem, and it alerts you. So the whole premise here around data risk and data governance is making sure that all of your data, wherever it is, whether you've got it in a self-service way, or you're controlling it centrally, or you're doing things in DevOps, you're doing things in the cloud, it has this central umbrella of it. So you can always see what state your organization's in and whether you're compliant or non-compliant. And as data is just massively exploding, and we're continuing to add apps about orchestrated failovers and failover to the cloud, etc. When I heard the vision of this is ultimately why I left financial services to join Rubrik, because data is exploding, the location of all this data is exploding, There's more threats against your data than ever before. And Rubrik solidly wants to be part of the solution. So that's us from 50,000 overview.
Great, thank you so much, James, for that overview. And of course, James will be back with us for the Q&A session. So if there's anything you'd like to address to him based on that presentation, or indeed anything that you've been thinking of in general, please do pop it in the Q&A and we'll be able to talk again later. So on the subject of audience participation, which we were pretty good at earlier, I have our second poll for this morning. Dave, if you'd like to bring it up and I can talk us through it. So our next question for the audience is, which of the following has taken up most of your time over the past 12 months? Was it deciding what solutions to adopt, securing the appropriate resources, or compliance with best practices? Give you a moment there to share your thoughts with us. Okay, Dave, I think we'll end the poll there and we will revisit those figures later on. Again, very interesting to see roughly where the spread is so far. And I think it will make an excellent conversation poll later. So Dave, if you want to close the poll there, and we will move on to our next guest. So now we are joined by Stephen Byrne, who's the head of global operations with Stryker at one of the world's leading medical technology companies. I'm sure it's a brand which you are all familiar with. Its Irish operation alone consists of thousands of employees spread across locations in Cork and Limerick. Stephen's career includes stints at a number of large enterprises, including Sevier Industries, Johnson & Johnson, and Softco. And here's to tell us about his experience of secure cloud migration during these uncertain times. So, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And I suppose to start at the beginning, really, I mean, Stryker being such a huge organization, where did you begin in your cloud migration journey? What was the scale of the problem that you had to look at?
Hi, Niall, good morning. Yeah, I think, just to refer back to some of the comments James made, I mean, we were on that digital transformation journey, probably going back to 2015. Stryker, as you said, is a very big global organization. It's a $16 billion company. So we have a very, very big global presence. In the early days of our transformation, we focused on the consolidation of as many systems as we could to strategic global data centers. But then in 2016, 2017, we got really kind of ramped up on what we call our cloud journey. One of the issues we faced in our ability to kind of close out the loop in terms of how we were transforming was our very I suppose complex backup environment. We were running 14 different solutions across tape, disk. We had people running on site. We had people storing tapes with sensitive data in places that they shouldn't have been. And all of the kind of the day-to-day issues that you would have with that. Cybersecurity was also something that was becoming more and more of a challenge for us. And working closely with our internal security team, we were being challenged more and more to bring best-in-class solutions to the table. So in 2017, 2018, Rubrik became I suppose a company at the time that was becoming more and more visible to us. We, as I said, we needed to really focus it. initially we needed to really focus on how we were going to kind of modernize and well, modernize, stabilize, and also reduce the number of services we were working with to, you know, basically do one same job. So after a period of I suppose getting to know one another, for us to learn the Rubrik solution in mid 2019, we I suppose agreed executive sign off internally in Stryker to deploy Rubrik as our, you know, what we call our global standard. January 2020 we began our migration, our global migration. And as everyone knows, you know, in February, March, everything changed very quickly. But the real benefit that we saw from Rubrik was our ability to physically deploy it, stand it up as a solution, and complete our transformation exercise last year with zero impact from everything else that was going on. We deployed Rubrik to our global data centers, you know, which constitutes probably about 60 to 70% of our data. We were able to retire any legacy systems that were running in there. We were able to satisfy our security, our cybersecurity leadership in terms of what Rubrik was doing for us, in terms of, you know, data encryption at rest, data encryption in transit, and you know, we were able to leverage last year almost $2 million in operational savings from it. This year we will complete our global deployment. We will reduce our service delivery function by almost 90% in terms of the number of daily tickets that we manage as a result of the backup function. And then, you know, we will look to, you know, I think the area of data governance is probably the next logical step for us then on this journey and partnership.
Looking at the technical scale there, you mentioned sort of almost being surprised by certain things and where they were being stored. Were there an awful lot of sort of kind of scary nooks and crannies from a security perspective? Were there a few parts of your estate where you were like, okay, this was actually badly neglected? Not only is this a necessary problem from a technical perspective, but almost more so from a security one.
Yes, you know, if you kind of go away from cybersecurity for a minute, if you just look at kind of traditional physical security, you know, we've got many manufacturing locations. We've got about 45 manufacturing locations globally, where the vast majority of backups were done to tape. Not all sites were compliant in where data was stored. You would have it you could have it in a steel cabinet in an office. You could have it, you know, in a loft. You could have it, and some places would have it off site. It was such a mishmash of everything. It's just so difficult to kind of keep everything on track.
Looking internally, seeing as you are dealing with such a massive organization, how difficult was it to get stakeholder buy-in? Was there any skepticism, or was there a broad acceptance that, look, this is a digital transformation journey, it's ongoing, and there is never going to be, you know, for want of a better term, an end point?
Difficult to get stakeholder buy-in. There was probably some resistance, yes. You know, our leadership prosecuted our proposals to the nth degree, but you know, we were very quickly able to dispel any concerns people had. You know, the Rubrik team came in and partnered with us. You know, it was I would say, you know, a very a very straightforward process. I think the biggest challenge that we had at the time was that Rubrik was such a new name to a lot of people. But again, I suppose the confidence they showed, the professionalism in their approach kind of really helped that.
So again, looking towards internal factors, to what extent did you have to adapt or change your own perspective on your in-house data? Of course, data being looked at as, you know, the new oil, or depending who you ask, the new plutonium. Did your own relationship with the data inside Stryker change as a result of going through this process?
Yes, I think, you know, we're in the I suppose the era of, you know, GDPR and, you know, China cybersecurity and Russia cybersecurity laws are kind of you know, at the forefront at the moment. Almost by default, we were able to, you know, really show value for what we were trying to do, and to be honest, it was really not our initial focus. It wasn't really what we were looking at. But again, as we understood the solution better, as we understood what we were deploying and how, it ticked a lot of boxes for other groups within the organization, not just for, you know, IT or IT operations. Again, our governance groups, our compliance, our security, we were able to solve almost their problems as well.
And in looking at that sort of the gestalt, if you will, where you have the technical element, the business element, and that legal element as well, how was that project managed? You know, was it through separate meetings, or was it a matter of getting everybody in the room and trying to speak the same language, that yes, there is going to be significant outlay for hardware, but we've also got to watch out for the legal element at the same time?
So all of our project approvals go through a cycle of you know, legal reviews, governance, all the rest of me. So we have to go through various stage points anyway. But again, you know, through our POC testing, we were able to show the value. We were able to show how we would be able to address concerns. So I suppose our final approval process is through our senior IT leadership team, which partners with our finance. And again, you know, I have to say it was a more straightforward process for us than normal.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephen, just for that overview of Stryker and your digital transformation efforts there at the moment, and where Rubrik sort of fits into that big picture. So if you'd like to stick around with us, I would invite James back. And I'd also like to have Paddy back on board as well. So we're joined now by Paddy Merrigan, who is a sales engineer with Rubrik. And I suppose what I'd like to do, Paddy, is I'd like to fire off one of our poll results there at you and see how it tallies with your experience so far. So Dave, if you want to bring up the result there on screen, if you can. But so we had, did your company revise its cloud migration plans over the past year? 55% said yes, 45% said no. I was actually quite surprised at the spread there, given you know, the climate. Does that tally with your experience?
Morning, Niall. I think it does. It's kind of some of the trends we're seeing out there today. I think if we go back to what Stephen mentioned, when Stryker reviewed their environment, they had 14 different solutions. So there's a huge amount of complexity. So I think what we achieved working with the Stryker team, and Stephen, you may come in on this, is we enabled them to consolidate a lot of solutions down into a single solution with Rubrik. And one of the core functionality of Rubrik is it's built on a simplicity. It's a simple platform to use, to manage. And we see that by, Stephen mentioned, 90% reduction in operations. So I think what we're seeing with organizations today that we're working with is they're trying to get the on-premise solution streamlined before they look at moving to the cloud, before they look at that migration process. But with Rubrik, we also give them a low risk entry point into the public cloud where we can begin to write that data to the cloud for their migration progress in the future.
I think when you look at traditional backup solutions, the ability now to bypass almost a significant capital expenditure all the time to, or at least on an annual basis, to kind of service the demand to hold data. You know, again, I think that the solution really, you know, adds a massive positive in that sense as well.
James, would you like to join in there?
Yeah, so I'm not surprised by the results. I think what I've really noticed is when you're doing cloud stuff, or when you're trying to push applications to the cloud, it's a cultural change. You know, I've said this a few times that IT is a people business, right? And if you want to do fundamentally something different, it's great to get everyone together, get the sticky boards out, get the Kanban boards out, you know, get people excited. And you can do that when everyone's together. So what I've really noticed as well is if you were already on this journey and the pandemic kicked in and everyone was at home, you've just carried on the journey and you're doing what you said you were going to do. If you hadn't started the journey and the pandemic kicked in, what I really noticed is while everyone's remote, the modus operandi was, you know, let's survive this thing. Let's do what we're doing now. Let's survive it. And then when the world starts turning again, we're going to really start our transformation and our change programs again. So I'm not necessarily massively surprised by that. You know, but bringing it back to say, you know, data protection and backups, what we really did notice, which has driven a lot of cloud actually in the last 12 months, is that when the whole world was locked down and everyone was still relying, well, not everyone, but a large majority of firms were still relying on tape, for example, all the data centers were shut. So no vans could go to data centers to collect tapes, take them offsite to another bunker, which meant that the whole risk profile of every organization that still relied on tape changed literally overnight. So, you know, we've done a lot of work in that area at the moment, but generally I'm not that surprised by those results. And I think, you know, I would have thought things would change. No, now there's kind of a roadmap that we're going to get out of this and the world's going to start turning again. I can see those numbers kind of shifting.
Actually, Stephen, that's an interesting point on risk. Have you found your relationship to risk change within Stryker, especially when you're looking at things like physical backups, that sort of thing?
We maintain, you know, a maybe primitive type of risk register where we, you know, where we monitor or we track on a quarterly basis, you know, where we feel we're at risk, both from a data and an infrastructure point of view. What we have seen is we have moved a lot of different locations from red to green over the past year as a result of what we're doing here.
Actually, a quick question there from the audience as well, Stephen. Just wondering, how big a team do you have working under you?
We have, I think, about 20 FTEs globally, supported by an expanded service delivery function, which contains maybe about 30 to 40. But interestingly, the Rubrik deployment was completed by no more than 2 or 3 people.
Okay, I hope that has solved that particular question. So Dave, let's just go to our second poll there and have a look at the results. So this is where we asked which of the following took up most of your time over the past 12 months. And I actually found this quite interesting that it did seem to be quite an even split, with compliance with best practices coming out on top. I suppose let's start with you, Stephen. Does that tally with your own experience?
Yes, I suppose when I looked at that question, it was the third one that probably resonated most. It's you know, we've been able to focus now on our compliance levels rather than trying to kind of address what went before.
Patrick, are you seeing a similar thing out in the wild?
Yeah, no, definitely. As Stephen mentioned, we're seeing customers trying to streamline for best practice. Obviously, that enables them to be more dynamic around the estate and around the environment.
Okay. Actually, I'd like to ask you about that issue of risk, Paddy, as well. Seeing as you're seeing more customers out there on a daily basis, are people sort of more aware of what to do at their estate or asset disposal or GDPR compliance still? What are the real headaches out there?
I think first of all, what we're seeing is, as the guys have mentioned previously, is the complexity around environments. What we're seeing as well with the introduction of cloud and customers looking at a multi-cloud strategy, there's a fragmented approach today. There's data now everywhere. So what organizations really are looking for is a single platform that can monitor, manage, report on all their data, regardless where it resides. And that's one of the real challenges we're seeing out there today. I think with the Rubrik platform, we give them that ability. I don't know, James, is there anything you want to add around there?
Around compliance and risk, yeah. Well, my gut feeling is people haven't necessarily got their arms around this on an industry level yet. So, going back to your initial question, that initial question from the poll, the third one is about compliance and risk, or best practices. Sorry, but best practices for me is all about the skill set required to implement the best practice. If you look at the cloud, there's always been this moniker that the cloud is insecure. The cloud is insecure. The cloud isn't insecure. But if you configure it insecurely, then yes, it is insecure. So I think there's been always this reticence that, once you've accepted you're going to do the cloud, then you've got to bring in the right people to be able to do it. And those people have got to be able to adhere to the best practices of it. Now, skipping forwards to compliance as an example, there's also this misconception that, don't worry about it, we'll chuck it over the fence. AWS, Google, Microsoft, they've got this. Okay, I haven't got to worry about any of this ever again because the cloud providers have got it. That's their problem now. And it isn't, right? The cloud providers will guarantee you your computing, your resources, your tin, they'll run the applications. But the data, etc., that those applications are relying on, that is all yours. And it is 100% your responsibility to look after. And it's included in, say, Office 365. There are various components in Office 365, which, that can do things like legal hold and can look after mailbox, etc. But if you go through the T's and C's and the small print of Office 365, they heavily recommend that you have a recovery position for the data that you are holding in Office 365. So I don't think people have necessarily got their head around this. I think it's getting better now, actually. Some of the conversations I'm having are so different now than they were 12 months ago. 12 months ago, it was like, yeah, they've got it. I haven't got to worry about this. Microsoft's going to do it. Whereas now I think they're kind of realizing, actually, the most critical part of what we're doing here is the data. Let's think about doing something a bit differently. And actually, where is that data and where is it being replicated to as well? So if you start going into data governance and data sovereignty rules, then you've got to really be on top of that.
Yeah, and we just have a question from the floor there from Donald Mahoney asking about an action plan for safe harbor. Is safe harbor still a thing? James, if you want to take that first.
I think safe harbor is a thing. We used to hear a lot about safe harbor. Yeah, I think it's still a thing, and we still talk about various safe harbor parts when we're discussing our roadmaps and things like that. I mean, the good thing about these regulations is they are really well documented. And if you do your own research, you haven't got to reinvent the wheel, and you haven't really got to figure things out these days, because generally speaking, someone has already figured out what best practice looks like, and there's a lot already published. So in the case of safe harbor, the rules are there, the framework's there, and it doesn't have to be that necessarily difficult to follow it if it applies to you.
Paddy, looking at safe harbor and GDPR, do people think they're interchangeable? Is there an awareness of what safe harbor actually is? Is there an awareness of data sovereignty, or are these blanks that you're finding you have to fill in for people?
No, definitely people with regards to GDPR, people are well up on the requirements there. And I think how we help them, James alluded to, is we have the data governance solution within Rubrik. So when people are beginning to look at their cloud migration plan, we have the ability to look within the data, to identify the PII, to do GDPR data classification searches, and enable them then to migrate the correct data sets to the correct region within the cloud.
Another question from the floor here. What recommendations would the panel make for secure asset disposal? So I suppose this is looking at what approaches should people take, what and where to dispose of. Paddy, do you want to take that first?
I might flick that one over to Stephen, because obviously Stephen would have been in that position previously.
Yeah, sure, Stephen.
Oh, good question. We have when we have deployed Rubrik, you know, and like that. If I'm getting the question right, you know, we've disposed of our assets in as controlled a manner as possible. Again, it's just following whatever internal processes we have, by region or by business unit. I honestly don't have a huge amount of detail on that.
Yeah, I think it's an issue that probably will become more mature as we see more digital transformation projects and reach a certain stage. Actually, one thing that I find recurring an awful lot still in the debate is the role of hybrid cloud and whether people still want to manage their data either on site or through a mix or going public cloud first. James, where do you see that debate? I mean, are people still talking about keeping things on premise?
Yeah, they are. So I think there's a real misnomer that everything's in the cloud. I mean, it isn't. You know, 90% of our customers are in a hybrid state. And again, I think given some of the workloads they're doing and the cost and the speed and the performance benefits that they want from various on-prem workloads, I don't think that's ever going to change. I think what will change is the language of hybrid cloud. You know, I hate the phrase hybrid because it isn't really hybrid anymore. It's going to be more about dynamic workloads. And the more sophisticated we get at orchestrating our platforms, the more sophisticated we'll get in moving workloads in the most appropriate place. You know, and we already have customers at the moment. Again, this is where the data part of it becomes really important, because if you've got dynamic data, because again, data has gravity, so it needs to be near the applications. So you need a pretty complex orchestration platform to do this. But I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of workloads that you can move to the cloud or move back on-prem based on the workload that it's performing. Hence, it's going to be, you know, dynamic. And I see that a lot. I don't actually see that going away. It's very rare that I see customers 100% going, right, shutting down everything when moving to the cloud. When actually, you know, some of their financial models and their business models, it's actually better to be in a dynamic/hybrid state.
Paddy?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd agree with James there. You know, 95% of the customers we're speaking to still have an on-premise solution or an on-premise requirement. I think what we're beginning to see more is the multi-cloud strategy, where they'll move, as James says, dynamic workloads across the cloud for different cost purposes. So definitely, yeah, there's still a requirement for a hybrid cloud solution.
Paddy, I guess as somebody that's dealing with local companies, do you find there is a degree of realism as to the speed of projects, especially over the past year? Do you find people are coming to you going, look, we've suddenly got a massive problem with remote working. How quickly can we get this solved? Are you finding people have fairly unrealistic expectations that they want this thing done yesterday?
I think initially no, but we are seeing it now. You know, I think the beginning of the pandemic, the first real issue organizations had was setting up those remote users and giving them access to the systems of working from home. What we're beginning to see now, kind of the guys have covered off, we're beginning to see now that organizations are looking to, you know, speed up the actual migration to different platforms. I think we've helped an awful lot of organizations today working in that format.
Question for Stephen, I suppose, to start off. Where do you see the role of the vendor? We mentioned Microsoft there and the importance of having sort of your data in a row before, or you know, your data in an appropriate state before migration. Do you find there's similar sort of relationships between other vendors? Are vendors keen to sort of help you? Or is it still very much a case of, okay, this is your project, do it your way?
I think vendors are looking for opportunities to add more value. While not all vendors will probably have, you know, relationships or whatever, there is a what would I say? There's a consensus with a lot of vendors that if they can add value to an additional solution that you're deploying, so like if you talk about Rubrik in this case, then they will try to bring that to the table. Yeah.
I suppose, has your own attitude to risk changed within Stryker as well, having gone through this process? Do you see better security, better longevity, better compliance? I imagine these are all tremendous confidence boosting measures.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I mean, you know, our original focus was on, you know, a modernized backup solution where we could leverage cloud. I think the additional benefits to other parts of the organization have really made this a big win for us. So like that, we've ticked the boxes for cybersecurity, we ticked the boxes for data governance, we ticked the boxes for compliance. So yeah, I think it's been a big success in that way.
Yeah. James, just to sort of boil down the approaches companies are taking, they're either looking at things from a technical solution, a business solution, or the legal case. How do you find the spread of the market is out there? Is it a case of, you know, the techies are still ruling this, or does it come to the C-suite level that people are looking for solutions instead of waiting for somebody to come to them and go, we need X amount to deliver this digital transformation process, or we're not going to be able to do business in 6 months? Yeah,
it is absolutely a C-suite issue. I mean, we from my own background, you know, what the C-suite isn't looking at is the noughts and ones. I don't think they really care about the technology you use. They care about the outcomes. And when it comes to sort of transformation, you've got hard costs and soft costs. Hard costs are obviously, you know, your cost of all your infrastructure, your clouds, your costs, etc. But the soft costs are much more about the cost of people and the benefits. And you know, C-suites want to be able to disrupt markets. They want to be able to beat their competition. And generally speaking, to beat competition, you've got to get to market first. So that's the outcome. And again, with cloud, etc., that's the real soft benefit that we see our customers, and certainly my own sort of industry knowledge. That's the real benefit of cloud and the real benefit of the soft benefits, because if you can think of an app and provision it and get it out to market and get it to your customers in a couple of days or, you know, a couple of weeks, versus having to go to your data center, spin up a thing, go through change control, get the servers, you know, all of that stuff just takes too long. So that's a real benefit for the cloud. I mean, I sit in a lot of conversations with, you know, they're doing spreadsheets about, you know, right, the OPEX cost of this server would be this, whereas this CAPEX cost is this in our data center, fully loaded, we'd appreciate it, etc. But you think, right, but what about the speed? What about the application this thing is fixing? What about this application that this is serving to your business? So I really do think it is a C-level issue. You know, it used to be cases like the in-flight magazine. You know, I would, you know, an executive would read the in-flight magazine and know all about, you know, what was going on in the world, and then it would come to me with, right, how are we solving this? What are we doing about it? So yeah, it's definitely a C-level issue. How you solve it, you've got to focus on outcomes, and you've also got to focus on what's important to your organization. I think when it comes to risk and, you know, everything we were speaking about earlier, there's a tendency for IT and techies to think, oh, you know, risk is just, it's a way of holding us back. It's no good. The internal audit guys want to, you know, pick holes at us. But my advice from having done this is work really closely with them, because actually risk and governance doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. What it does is create a framework, the rules with which you've got to play the game. So once you know that and you can build your solutions around it, you end up high-fiving because you've met all your compliance objectives. But the main goal that your CEO wants to do, outside of, you know, keeping you out of the papers for any sort of data breach, is to get to market faster and be competitive, which is what all of these things allow you to do.
Final question for the panel here. Can you provide some information about how ransomware detection and recovery works? I suppose, Paddy, we'll go to you first with that.
Yeah, so I suppose going back to the question around the Irish market, I suppose a lot of what we're seeing in the past 6 to 12 months has specifically been around ransomware and ransomware remediation. So we have a unique play in that the underlying file system itself is immutable. And essentially what that means is any data that's written there cannot be amended, it cannot be modified or deleted. But we take it a step further. One of the key concerns and issues organizations have had in the past is once they get hit with a ransomware attack, it's identifying the blast radius, understanding what's changed. And when they've done that, it can take a significant amount of time to come back from that. You know, generally we'll see there's use case out there where we've seen organizations have been down for 7 to 14 days to bring back. So our unique play on it is initially we give you the immutability, so that's safeguarding your data protection solution. But thereafter, we have a solution where we can remediate, and we can remediate really, really quickly. So we can go in and identify what's changed. And once you've identified what's changed, and we have a workflow in place to enable you to recover it. So essentially, some of the organizations who've moved to Rubrik have stated that ransomware is more of a headache than an issue going forward.
Thanks so much, gentlemen, for a really interesting and informative conversation today. You can switch off your cameras and microphones. As promised, we have a draw for our Apple Watch SE. Our producer, Dave, has made the selection as we speak. And our winner is Jane Corr from Great West Life Europe. Congratulations, Jane. We'll be in touch about how to get your prize out to you. Now, if you wish to rewatch this event, you'll be able to do so on techfire.ie from, I think, Friday. We'll be able to get it online. You can also keep up to date with enterprise IT news from Ireland and beyond at techcentral.ie. Be sure to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Technology Minute. Of course, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and listen to us every week on Tech Radio. Thanks, everybody, for your time, and have a good Wednesday.